Adventures Through the Mind is an interview-based podcast hosted by me, James W. Jesso. Here on the show, we take an interdisciplinary approach to the vast nuances and outer reaches of the psychedelic experience and of psychedelic culture. However, none of the explicitly drug-oriented content is meant to glorify or promote the use of drugs in any way. It is in the values of harm reduction that this show seeks to educate and explore the important insights related to psychedelic research while encouraging responsible, safe, and informed decisions. Also, this podcast is a part of a larger body of work that is my artistic and educational investment in being a writer and a speaker. It is fully fan-funded and would not be possible without listeners like you. So a big thanks to those leaving one-time PayPal or crypto donations, as well as my patrons on Patreon for your generosity and support, especially those whose names are listed in the show notes to this episode. For those of you who have yet to become a supporter of the show, but are really liking it so far, I kindly invite you to offer whatever you can to the process of creating it by becoming my patron on Patreon or by leaving a one-time donation. Details can be found in the written description to this episode or at jamesandbjesso.com/support. Thank you. Enjoy the show. This episode is also sponsored by Transzen, a herbal supplement for mood and stress. Follow the link in the description and use the promo code ATTM for free shipping inside of the United States.
Is that a vape, James?
Yeah, since this bit's not being recorded, I'm kind of like keeping my nicotine levels high.
Are we taking a
we're
break now?
Break.
Is that like a burnt banana or something? What's the flavor today?
It's blueberry. Did you just hit that vape too? Yeah. Vape break. Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Adventures Through the Mind. I am your host, as always, James W. Jesso. Today, we have Julian Plamer and James Kent, and they're here to debate on a question that I asked them, which is, what do you believe is the fundamental nature of that which arises within a psychedelic experience? In particular regards to what is often called the Shamanic Paradigm, including the existence of a spirit realm, encounters with plant spirits or entities, and the capacity to invoke healing or divination within a psychedelic experience by way of this paradigm. I have these two people on the show to debate because they represent very opposing perspectives on the question of what could be maybe recapitulated as the fundamental realness of the shamanic experience. Which stance each of them takes will become abundantly clear very quickly into the show, so I will not go into that too much, as well as the intros for both of these gentlemen will be reserved, although I would encourage you to check out their independent interviews here on the show, which links to those will be included in the description to this episode, as well as at jameswjesso.com. In this particular episode, I cut out some of the sort of logistical discussions that happen intermittently throughout the recording, as well as the periods of time where each of these two guys were given space to think about their arguments and each other's arguments in preparation for the next phase of the debate. When you hear that sound, that means there was a cut. One announcement that I would like to offer to the listening audience before we get in is that I do a speaking tour every summer, typically. Sometimes throughout the winter, I do a few events here or there, but primarily in the summer. And last summer, I was giving a talk on inherited family trauma. The title of the talk was called Healing the Past. intergenerational trauma, and emotional responsibility. I gave it at multiple festivals across the western side of Canada, and the recording of my presentation at Shambhala Music Festival in BC is now available for you to freely listen to and hopefully gain from. You can find that at the lecture section of my website, jameswjesso.com, and at jameswjesso.com/events, you will be able to see the speaking tour that I will be going on this year, which is the second part of this announcement, in Europe, which is very, very exciting for me. So if you would like to find out what I'm teaching and where I will be teaching it this summer, you can head to jameswjesso.com/events. So finally, that is it. Thank you for listening to the intro and not skipping it with the timestamp that is contained in the first comment on YouTube or buffering through it, but actually taking the time to hear my voice, because the upcoming interview involves my voice for the most part as little as possible. Enjoy this great shamanic debate between Julian Palmer and James Kent. But we're good. Gentlemen, welcome. Have you met each other in person before?
No, I have not.
No, we'd never met. I never go to the States. I haven't been there since I was 18. So,
And I don't travel much anyway. So, hello, Julian.
hello, hi, James, and James,
And James, yes.
Great. Well, I'm very happy to have you guys here on the show. This has been an idea that's been in the making now for probably a year, and the last 2 months of really dialing in the specifics, and I trust it's going to be a pretty good show. So thanks to both of you guys for coming on and getting down with this idea.
No problem. Thank you.
oh, here we are.
You two gentlemen represent drastically oppositional sides to a rather large and important discourse around the nature of reality in regards to what arises within the psychedelic experience. I have you both on the show today to debate your perspectives on the following question. What do you believe is the fundamental nature of that which arises within a psychedelic experience, in particular regards to what is often called the shamanic paradigm, including the existence of a spirit realm, encounters with plant spirits or entities, and the capacity to invoke healing or divination within a psychedelic experience by way of this paradigm. The debate is structured, and Julian, you won the coin toss and have chosen to let James Kent go first. James, you have up to 10 minutes to present your thesis.
Okay. Well, today I am proposing or arguing for the neurological model, which examines psychedelics in terms of their pharmacological effect on perception. In general, tryptamine hallucinogens like LSD, psilocybin, and DMT work by interfering with the brain's serotonin system. The serotonin system modulates things like mood, awareness, digestion, blood pressure, and circadian rhythms, which regulate cycles of hunger, wakefulness, and sleepiness. In specific, the tryptamine hallucinogens interfere with the serotonin 2A and 2C receptor subtypes, and there's been a lot of research done on this. They act as partial agonists on those receptor subtypes, meaning they don't block or mimic serotonin. They produce a secondary signal which causes the modulatory pathways to act differently or become confused. In brain scans of people on hallucinogens, what you see is a decrease in power in beta wave brainwave activity in the forebrain that is associated with alertness and wakefulness. When that power diminishes, other areas of the brain, like the visual cortex and the auditory cortex, tend to become decoupled from coherence with the forebrain and start talking amongst themselves in irregular patterns, strengthening and amplifying signal between themselves without the power of the forebrain actually making those areas cohere to a stable system. When these systems start to decohere, you get a sort of sleepy kind of feeling that comes over you, a sense of detachment and varying levels of hallucination, which can, in higher dose states, become psychosis, where you no longer can tell the difference between reality and imagination. Now, psychosis is a well-understood mental state typified by powerful emotions and an overstimulated imagination, culminating in phenomenal experience like hearing voices and seeing visions. Many high-dose psychedelic states cross the line into psychosis where the user cannot tell the difference between reality and imagination. So in the parlance of the psychedelic community, if you have a psychotic experience on psychedelics that leads towards the paranoid, that's called a bummer, because you start to feel fear, panic attacks, and you feel like you're being attacked from an imaginary danger. Paranoid psychosis is extremely dangerous because it causes people to freak out and do all sorts of unpredictable things. On the other hand, you have what's called a manic psychosis, where the user actually believes that they have supernatural powers. They may feel invincible. They may feel like they have telepathy or clairvoyance. They may feel like they're entering into a spirit space. They may feel like they're in contact with God or voices or spirits that they actually visualize in front of them. Now, they may also feel like they're being miraculously healed. And this is one of the things that we're talking about, the shamanic paradigm. How do you invoke that healing energy? Well, in a psychedelic state, you can be very suggestible. So you can take someone from a paranoid psychosis and flip them into a more manic or peaceful psychosis just by suggesting that something is happening to them. So that if you put them in a suggestive paradigm, like a therapist and patient situation, and you give them the protocol that tells them when this starts happening and when you start feeling this, that is a healing feeling. Then they will begin to feel good about that feeling. They will have a positive feeling, and they will amplify that feeling until it just feels like they're in some sort of magical healing space. But these are technically just illusions. Psychedelics don't really heal anything. There's a very small list of things which psychedelics may actually be useful in treatment for. So the fact that we talk about psychedelics as healing is more of a spiritual dynamic or a psycho-spiritual dynamic, where you're talking about healing ambiguous things like depression or anxiety or ennui, or just things like dissatisfaction with the state of the world. And those aren't actually chronic illnesses like cancer or AIDS or other infections that you really think of in terms of like healing. When you're talking about something like chronic depression or anxiety or dissatisfaction with the state of the modern world, you don't really look for treatments that are going to cure that. You just have to manage that over time. So talking about healing, like some kind of magical healing is taking place where that thing is no longer a problem for you in the rest of your life, I think is, a misplaced idea that actually healing is going on. And really, the only people who discuss psychedelics in a healing context are the ones that want to charge you money to come down and take their therapy, sometimes for weeks at a time, claiming that they can heal you of something, when in actuality they can't heal you of that. Let's see, was there anything else? Yeah, so the power of psychedelics essentially comes from a pharmacological exploit in the brain's ability to dream and create ideas with imagination. It is a very powerful experience, but it should not be viewed as magical. And we should be wary of people who make the claim that it's magical, because we can do all of the technical science to see how it actually works without invoking a magical cause.
So my understanding regarding the psychedelic state is that the different phenomena that one can experience, I think, can arise from many different areas of consciousness. I do agree with James Kent that some of the phenomena in the psychedelic state can arise within the circuit of the mind and the brain, and there is definitely a factor in which there is a projection of some subconscious or unconscious material. And I think especially with LSD, you can find that's those sort of projections and those sort of hallucinations, which to my mind, when it comes to LSD, what you're experiencing is a manifestation of the spirit of the ergot. So in terms of plant spirits, I perceive that what you're experiencing is a communication of the ergot. So you're experiencing the ergot painting on your psyche. You're experiencing this originally sentient, alive molecule accessing areas of your brain and enabling a greater visionary state. And there's many different aspects to that. So I think if you're just looking at LSD, a lot of the time what you're seeing with LSD is this communication with the ergot molecule. And those sort of images are quite familiar to us, and many of them are very unconvincing as well. But then there are other levels to the LSD experience which are a lot deeper as well. And I believe that you can experience an awareness of consciousness that exists beyond the mind and the brain, especially in the higher doses. And of course, this is what people were doing in the 60s. They were taking large amounts of LSD, and then some people were trying to have an experience of the white light and, letting go of the ego and meeting God, And I think that this explanation really it really demonstrates itself because so many people in the 60s became religious. Many even became Hare Krishnas after taking LSD. Many became Buddhists. Rick Strassman says that the American Buddhist community is almost entirely inspired by people who took LSD in the 60s. So I think it really brought people to have an awareness that there was something else, that there actually was a deeper reality, a soul or a spirit or whatever you want to call it, whatever words you use. But at the end of the day, I think words are a bit redundant. So when it comes to DMT, I think that DMT is pretty much a surefire way to allow people to experience something more than the physical reality. And I think a lot of that is dependent on people smoking DMT properly and having good quality DMT. So when I first came across James Kent's works, the case against DMT-Ls, my thought was, I'm not sure he's smoking good quality DMT or actually smoking enough. And it's quite hard to do so. I know that Mark Pesch mentioned in Daniel Pinchbeck's book, The Church of the Motherfuckers, he had a church. He started a church called the Church of the Motherfuckers, a DMT smoking church. And he himself said that he'd never been able to smoke enough. You really need someone there to train you to make sure you smoke enough, because it's like smoking lawn furniture. It's tough. But when you do, in my experience, in the days when I first accessed DMT, me and a friend, we would have given it to hundreds of people, and the results are extraordinary. I mean, the meaningfulness and the meaningfulness that people experience, and the shift that people experience. I mean, I just find it hard to understand that anyone could really work with it for some amount of time, and not have people have those transcendent, completely life-changing experiences. That I think the issue I took with James Kent's original article, The Case Against DMT Elves, is he sort of talks about the images and experiences in the DMT state as being somewhat flimsy, not even of the quality or caliber of the dream state. And I think what a lot of people report is the vivid nature and the hyper reality and the sophistication of the visions is so pronounced that I think it's very hard to just deny it or push it away. The other issue that I have is that a lot of what people experience is not really elves at all. I mean, maybe I've met one or two people who've met elves. People seem to encounter such an incredibly wide array of beings, such an extraordinary wide array of beings that my conclusion, and it came, I suppose, in about a year or two after really seriously working with DMT, is that the reality is that we exist within a vast ecology of beingness, and there are many different kinds of, many different forms of being that we can experience. And DMT seems to unlock the brain. It seems to be some sort of hyper neurotransmitter. I disagree with James Kent that it disrupts the serotonin receptors, that it antagonizes them. That may be the case with LSD, but I do believe that DMT is a neurotransmitter, like many people believe, just like serotonin is. And it appears to allow a greater connectivity of information in the brain. It appears to allow a greater sense of awareness and connectivity and understanding. In terms of healing, I'm not necessarily talking about physical healing or physical ailments, but I believe that the first healing is the healing of the self, is coming to a sense of wholeness in the self, and that sense of interconnective consciousness that DMT or psilocybin mushrooms and the scientific studies are showing this interconnectivity. It's being demonstrated that the brain is becoming hyper-connected. And in this hyper-connected nature, people are able to think about themselves. They're able to conduct their own therapy. They're able to become more aware of themselves, have deeper realizations about themselves, their lives, who they are, how they're being. And, you know, I think this is more like pure therapy than healing, that people can correct themselves and have an awareness of how they can be a better human being. You also mentioned divination, James. I think that's a very interesting one. It's not so well used, that word in the psychedelic milieu, but divination has been a part of many traditional cultures. And I know a man whose Sangoma healer in South Africa used to use a plant, a South African psychoactive plant, for divination, where she would use that plant to find out things about people, even to find objects as well.
Arthur C. Clarke once said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Now, I see psychedelics as a technology, a pharmacological technology. And because Julian describes it as a kind of magic, that indicates to me that he does not have a sufficient understanding of this technology. He sees intoxication as a form of contact with a plant spirit, what he calls a sentient molecule or sentient plants. Now, at one point in history, all forms of intoxication were associated with some kind of spirit possession. In fact, distilled alcohol was called spirits because humans believed that when they were getting drunk, a happy spirit was taking them over and causing them to do things that they wouldn't normally do. Now, we know a lot about the pharmacology of alcohol, and we understand how it works by depressing the central nervous system and slowing down our impulses, causing us to be sort of sloppy and losing inhibitions. Now, because we know that, we no longer consider alcohol to be a form of spirit possession when we get drunk. And we no longer consider smoking cannabis or taking opium or taking cocaine to be a form of communion with the spirit. However, Julian would like us to go back to the dark ages of understanding and assume that we are, instead of becoming intoxicated and changing the perception of our own brain, we are instead talking to a plant spirit. And this takes medicine back 1,000 years to when people thought that illness was a form of demonic possession. And healers would do all sorts of crazy magic to expel demonic spirits from people, including making them eat hot coals and take all sorts of poisons that would make them vomit and completely purge themselves as a way of cleaning out the spirits, because they did not have a sufficient understanding of medicine. They thought it was magic. Now, so with hallucinogens, there is still this lingering mythology that we are somehow contacting a plant spirit, and that somehow spirits are involved in this intoxication. And this is just a perfect prime example. This is Exhibit A of somebody ascribing magical powers to a natural phenomena they don't fully understand. Another troubling thing about what Julian says is he describes people taking hallucinogens and becoming spiritual and dropping out into cults like the Hare Krishna. Now, I have actually known people who were in the Hare Krishna who have been deprogrammed from the Hare Krishna, and they do not have good things to say about their time in Hare Krishna. I have known people who have dropped out, become Buddhists, and sat zazen 12 hours a day for months at a time because of their spiritual awakening. And these people did not come out of the Buddhist meditation retreat centers any more grounded or self-aware than when they went in. This is all just sort of high talk about spiritual awakening to make this sound like some sort of, educational exercise through the self, when it's not. I mean, these people got turned around, their lives got completely derailed, and they went off on these spiritual exercises that took years away from their lives and taught them all sorts of weird, mythologies that have no application in the real world. So he also mischaracterizes some things I say about DMT. He says that I wasn't taking enough DMT, I didn't have quality DMT, and in fact I was doing it wrong and I needed to take more. Now, I took plenty of DMT, and I took it from plenty of different sources, and I've had plenty of breakthrough experiences where I crossed over into the spirit world, met spirits, talked with spirits, met huge alien spacecrafts that were hovering over my house as my roof slid open and the lights came down and started peering at me and scanning every molecule inside me. I know what this is like. I'm not like some novice here trying to tell you that these experiences don't happen. I just question the reality of these experiences because I've done them enough to know that, I'm fooling myself. I'm fooling myself if I think these are spiritual. And I don't say that these experiences are flimsier than dreams. I'm saying that they are a different quality than dreams. They are more kinetic and symbolically transitional than dreams. They move from space to space faster and with a more liquid quality than being in a dream. But they do share some of the same qualities of dreams, is that you are able to completely manifest imaginary spaces, beings, and objects just on a whim, just by thinking about it. Now, Julian says he doesn't believe that DMT is, well, he called it an antagonist, but it's not an antagonist. It's a partial agonist of the serotonin system. And if you don't understand the difference between an antagonist and a partial agonist, that just is, Exhibit B, that you don't understand the technology that you're talking about. Now, you can say you don't believe that DMT interferes with the serotonin system, but you can look at the receptor studies and you can look at the brain scans and you can see that what I am saying is accurate. DMT does not hyperactivate the brain like a I don't even remember, hyperneurotransmitter or hypertransmitter. The brain actually begins to decouple and lose power and look like it's falling asleep as it hallucinates. It doesn't look like a brain that's highly awake and aware. That's a brain on methamphetamine or cocaine that starts to look like it's highly awake and aware and super focused. And if you want to call methamphetamine a super spiritual hypertransmitter, I would say, okay, well, at least you're talking about a hypertransmitter that actually works the way you're talking about. DMT is very closely associated with dreaming and imagination. And that's the reason that taking ayahuasca and LSD and mushrooms make you feel sleepy. And it's I'm not making this up. You can just look at the brain scans and look at the studies to see what I'm talking about. Now, this wide ecosystem of beings that we come into contact with, I can tell there's a big tell that this ecosystem is not real, because I cannot just magically say pink elephants exist and have a pink elephant manifest into the real world. That's the difference between reality and fiction, is we cannot just think or imagine or wish things into reality. However, in this ecosystem of spirits filled with infinite beings, I can just imagine or wish a jeweled alligator or an ancient snake or an ancient stone hippopotamus being or a giant mosquito that sucks black entities out of my body, or a unicorn that rams its horn into my heart and causes all of the black goo to disappear. I can invent any fictional entity to inhabit this space and have it come true, which means that it's not a reality. It's a plastic space that can be inhabited by anything that you can imagine, which is called your imagination, which is different than reality, which is basically the main point I'm trying to make. Imagination is different than reality. When you confuse the two, you cross the boundaries between sanity and insanity.
Julian, you are up. You have 10 minutes starting now.
I think the first point I'd like to make is about James's use of the word psychosis. And he uses the word crazy a lot as well, I noticed. And my view of psychosis is, I do believe that there is an element of psychosis, of traditional psychosis, in which people who may be diagnosed as schizophrenic or manic depressive may in fact be experiencing valid phenomena. And I think that to suddenly use the word psychosis and to just say, oh, that's just crazy, and just put it in a box and just shove it over there so you don't have to deal with it or acknowledge where it's coming from or why it's existing in the first place. I think that's quite a big error. I think in that case you're really just pushing away the data without really looking to see why this phenomena is happening for that person. And so my belief is when people are experiencing voices, when they are seeing things, they may in fact be seeing things that are there. So I don't necessarily believe in the traditional diagnosis of schizophrenia. I think it's very inelegant. I think the mental health industry in our day and age is exceedingly primitive. The tools they have to treat schizophrenia simply disrupt brain function and create a chemical lobotomy. So I really, object to the sort of shoving away or pushing away this phenomena and just saying, well, that doesn't count because it's crazy, because it's psychotic. So I think that give me a moment. I'm a little bit
Cool. You
bit
still
stuck.
have 7.5 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, we'll start with the Hare Krishnas. I think related to the Hare Krishnas, I'm not necessarily saying that the Hare Krishnas or the Buddhists are people or practices that I necessarily ascribe to or believe are valuable or worthy. I was just pointing out and saying that actually these people were orientated to a more religious perspective after taking LSD. So that's something of a straw man argument. I'm not necessarily valuing or giving credibility to the Hare Krishnas or any religious cults. My orientation is definitely not religious in that context. Related to many things you're saying, James, I keep coming back to the pre-trans theory. I'm not sure if you're aware of the pre-trans theory that was developed by Ken Wilber. And his perspective was that there can be a tendency by people in the modern day to ascribe pre-rational qualities to phenomena that may actually be trans-rational, that may be post-rational, that may actually represent an evolutionary or higher consciousness state rather than a mythic, pre-rational or primitive state. I definitely do not consider myself to be someone who is trying to encourage people to take up the ways of ye olde times. In fact, related to the psychedelic state and, say, the ayahuasca scene, and my general orientation is very forward-thinking. So I think that, that is a presumption to presume that all this phenomena is simply a relic of times gone past. I do believe that perspective is quite ideological and not necessarily taking into account what people are experiencing. I personally do see that people at times are communicating with spirits, that spirits are communicating with people. And I see this a lot. I see it all the time. I worked with thousands of people. I see people communicating with plant spirits all the time. The plants tell them things about their life and enables them to understand themselves and their own life. So I don't ascribe plant spirits to somehow being a relic of the primitive mind. I believe that communicating with plant spirits is a demonstration of intelligence rather than some sort of inferior intelligence.
So what I hear in Julian's rebuttal is that he doesn't really have any evidence to discount the scientific argument. He says the scientific argument and the technologies that I've described here for studying how psychedelics work do play a large point in explaining how these work. He doesn't like me because I use the words crazy, psychosis, and insane to describe behaviors that any normal person would describe as insane. When I hear him talking about taking the claims of insane people seriously, I can tell that he has probably not spent time in a clinic, in a mental health crisis clinic, where people are suffering serious psychosis, psychotic delusions, and manic delusions, believing that they're Jesus, believing that they're prophets, believing that they have spirits inside of them, believing that they're the reincarnation of Napoleon, believing all sorts of insane things that are insane, and I don't say them to demean any kind of wisdom that you might find in the psychedelic experience. I'm just saying that if you are standing on the top of a building, high on drugs, and you think that you can fly, that is insane, and that is one of those insane things that you can test immediately. A lot of insane things, like whether or not I am the second coming of Christ, are not something that you can test immediately. So you can walk around with that delusion for a long, long time, alienating everybody in your life and refusing to back down from it until you do get some kind of medical treatment, whether it be therapy or pharmacology or some kind of combination of psychotherapy and drugs to keep you grounded again. And believe me, after being in this field for 20 years, I have seen lots and lots and lots of lost white boys out there who believe that they are the second coming of Christ. Now, that's just insane. And I'm not going to take what they say seriously because I know that they're not all the second coming of Christ. Now, one of the biggest proponents of this spirit model or shamanic model of psychedelic activation was Terence McKenna. And I actually heard him say that we need to take the claims of insane people more seriously. People who are locked up in psych wards, we should start taking their claims more seriously because maybe they are tapping into something that we don't normally see, so that we need to go back and reevaluate everything that they're saying. Now, I don't need to remind you that this is the guy who also thought the world was going to end in 2012 because of some magical riddle he decoded through the I Ching and the Mayan calendar. Now, all of his life, people around Terence were telling him that he was insane for believing this, and he never backed down. Now, this is the hero of this movement. This is the hero of their movement, is the guy who believed the world was going to end in 2012 because of something a voice told him while he was high on mushrooms about the I Ching. Now, if that's where you want to be taking your life advice from, and you want to be taking your life advice from these people who believe that the scientific method is somehow incomplete because it doesn't take into account the views of crazy people, then by all means do that. Do that and see how your life turns out. And that will be all the evidence you need to verify my claims on this side of the debate.
So related to what James was saying about the science of psychedelics, my view with the science of psychedelics and even the understanding of the brain is I tend not to pay too much attention to it because I think we're in a very primitive stage of evolution. I think that our understanding is very incomplete. There's many holes, and it's just actually a lack of studies being carried out. Psychedelic science is very much in its infancy. So I barely look at it, to be honest. I don't take it seriously. I have a hard time taking it seriously because it's fucking pathetic. Actually, what people experience is so far beyond this very limited, like reductionistic, mechanistic viewpoint. So it's just kind of a waste of time from my perspective. And for those who love it and are interested in it, fascinated by it, like, go for it, guys. Like, let's do more of it because it's in a very infantile state as far as I'm concerned. Because there's just so much. There's just an extraordinary amount of phenomena that I do believe is technology. I don't believe in magical thinking. I believe what we're experiencing are greater and greater degrees of technology and information. And that information is coming from outside the circuit of the mind, brain, and body. And there's many people who agree with me. I'm not saying that would make me right, but I'm saying most experienced people who take psychedelics come to that conclusion. And the reason why they work and that they are effective in treating these issues like depression and ennui and anxiety and so on is because people can get a sense of hope and inspiration and understanding that there's something more out there, that there's a greater reality that's meaningful and has some meaning and touches them, that moves them, that brings them to tears. I think that's very important. We go into all this this brain chemistry hullabaloo. We miss the human element, the sophisticated emotional response, which is multifaceted, multi-layered. Related to mentally ill people, actually, James, I have been to a mental hospital many times, not as a patient, but a girlfriend of many years was admitted to one. So I have some intimate knowledge of the mental health system and how it works, and how they treat mentally ill people and how mentally ill people are. And I do believe there is a reason for why people experience what they experience. Say these delusions that people have that they're Jesus, I would account for that they are experiencing or understanding themselves as, they're experiencing themselves as God on earth. They're experiencing that Christ consciousness and trying to interpret it through a very limited view. I think it's a stage to go through myself, and I see many, many people getting stuck in this stage in the psychedelic world, and just in the world in general. It's a kind of egocentric state, believing you're Jesus or whatever. In fact, we're all Jesus. This is the understanding that we're all one, which is a very obvious, evident experience that many people come to in the psychedelic experience. Related to Terence McKenna, I understand you don't like Terence McKenna. I find a great deal of whimsy and humor in Terence McKenna's work. I personally always thought 2012 was bullshit, and I was never into Time Wave Zero. I just thought he was very humorous. I thought he was a very wise thinker, and his mind was very fluid and adaptable to really thinking about and abstractly conceiving of the meanings of these states. So I don't know many people who are upset by Terence McKenna. Maybe you take him a bit too seriously.
I'm going to ask you guys a pointed question each based on your arguments that hopefully will represent sort of a characterizing of asking from the other person's perspective. So James, when I ask you a question, it's going to be in a challenge kind of coming from Julian's point. And Julian, when I ask you a question, it's going to be a challenge coming from James's point, hopefully. But of course, for the listeners, my characterizations could be wrong. So pardon me on that regards. So the question, which each of you will get 5 minutes, the one question now, specifically, it's for James Kent. You have this suggestion that what people are experiencing when they're tripping psychedelics is ultimately all extensions of something that's happening inside of their brain. It's a subjective manifestation of an imaginative type. It's a subjective manifestation of discombobulated neural activity, and it is imagination, it is hallucination, and the degree to which it is believed in would be the degree to which it is psychotic, a lack of capacity to be able to differentiate between what is real, according to your standards, what I believe is what science and classical sciences might call objectively real, and what is illusion, and this would be sort of the degree towards psychosis. Yet does this apply towards other cultural ways of thinking? Because of course the biomedical physicalist model for measuring and understanding reality is a cultural model, although based in science I have a very good trust in science's capacity to correct its own mistakes, but it's still, physicalism is still a cultural model. So do you see other cultures who believe in, say, spirits or into divinations, ones that still embrace shamanism? Like, do you perceive that these are now all like inferior cultures because they lack the truth of reality that us here in the Western world, are smart enough to have figured out? Is this a claim that you're making? And if so, how do you differentiate that from the very type of ethnocentric ignorance that led to all the empires of old that have crushed cultures along the way? 5
Sure.
minutes.
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. If you look at the history of the 19th and 20th century, when imperial cultures were expanding out into unexplored regions, they were always surprised to find primitive native peoples who were still essentially stuck in the Stone Age, who hadn't ever left the oral tradition, who never developed any kind of writing, who never developed any symbolic rationalism, and their primary technology was basically maintaining a stable wood-burning fire. And they were also surprised to find that these cultures, many of them, if not all of them, still retained some kind of visionary ritual that they considered magic, a magic spiritual connection that they had to their plants and the environment. Now, I'm not saying that this is an inferior way of thinking. I'm saying that this is a different way of thinking. And this way of thinking essentially leaves you in the Stone Age, because you never leave the oral tradition and the mythic tradition of superstition and ritual. The visual tradition, the oral tradition, the superstition, and the ritual is the cultural glue that holds you together. Now, when a society develops things like writing and a religious text, and things like calendars and astronomies to mark the passing of time, they leave oral tradition. They leave magical thinking. They leave the mythic in the past. And then they develop these systems of symbolic thinking, which allows them to create things like language, agriculture, industry, technology, and the things that we now take for granted in the modern world. Now, when you look around the world and say, would I rather live in the post-magical industrial world that has things like technology and electricity and lifespans that don't end at the age of 40 but go up to 100 and more? Or would you rather live in the Stone Age that's held together with magical thinking and ritual and superstition, where people don't know how to accurately treat disease and they don't know how to live, a life that goes on more than 40, 50 years? You can say one is inferior and one is superior, but the Darwinian fact shows that one is in the past and one is leading towards the future. And psychedelics, Terence McKenna had a word called the Archaic Revival, where people who take psychedelics suddenly want to go back in time to the Stone Age, to embrace the mythic and live in a world of harmony where we are one with nature. And that all sounds very magical and very neat and wonderful and tidy. But when you actually go back and live in Stone Age culture, it's not all ideal. There's a lot of strife. There's a lot of hardship. There's a lot of people dying from stuff like malnutrition and parasites, and people who get small cuts on their arm who then have to have their arm amputated because they don't know how to treat infections. Now, if you want to go back to that culture and to that lifestyle and romanticize that as somehow being more pure because you're living in harmony and in this magical world, that's fine. But I prefer this one, and if I'm being ethnocentric, then fine, I'll take it. But I am not going to go archaic revivaling off into the past just because I like magical thinking more than I like rational thinking. I am accepting rational thinking and physicalism because it is the model that actually produces results, that has predictive results that you can test, that doesn't rely on some sort of magical fantasy.
Okay, thank you. In the nature of the discourse, I'm going to give Julian, I'm going to give you up to 5 minutes to respond to James's answer to that question before I move on to the question for you. Yeah, starting right now.
Well, I for one am not an archaic revivalist. I don't actually believe that we should move backwards somehow like Terence McKenna thought and bring back the past. I essentially believe in moving forward. And I believe in moving forward, there must be something to move forward into. There must be a greater degree of territory. One thing that I often say is that imagine 500 years into the future. What is their understanding of reality going to be? Surely it's going to be much wider and vaster and expanded than our version of reality. They're going to have much more sensitive instruments than we have. I'm certainly not anti-science. I'm pro-science all the way, but I'm not into scientific dogma. I'm not into prejudiced ways of viewing the world. I'm not into supporting a predetermined ideological outlook which physicalism and materialism presents. I do believe that that physical reality is one spectrum of reality, and there's many spectrums of reality, and that I believe that we will discover, humanity will discover these other spectrums of reality and these other dimensions of reality, which of course are already being hypothesized and understood by people working in the scientific arena at this stage. So I think that we should be keeping an open mind, and we should be expanding our orientation and having an objective view as to what the phenomena is that people are experiencing, and not having a skeptical orientation in saying, no, that's crazy, it ain't so, that's a hallucination, that's a delusion, that's crazy. I think this is very much a skeptical, denialistic viewpoint, which is unhealthy, and I think that is not really, is becoming less and less popular, I would say, in the psychedelic world, that especially in the when there's increasingly a lot of people coming from a scientific perspective who are moving into this, I suppose, medicalized the role of psychedelics in society in a medical sense. A lot of people who are working in this field, they're not wanting to predetermine a reality, because we have a chance to explore and enlarge our understanding, and the psychedelics are a tool for doing this. I think to just say, well, it's all psychosis, it's all delusion, it's all just noise, is a big block to further progress. I think that's a castrative move that leads to a nihilistic, unconstructive viewpoint. So this is why I disagree with a lot of James Kent's arguments, because I don't believe they allow the exploration necessary for us to really understand what the truth is.
Okay. So my question here for you, Julian, excuse me, it might take me a second to sort of sort it out. But you made a point there about not being supportive of anyone entering into any type of religious cult, or not being supportive of religious cults in general when there was discussion about the Hare Krishnas, for example. And you also make points against James's claim towards like psychosis and delusion and schizophrenia as having some sort of like being an inherently dysfunctional brain issue that disconnects a person from what is actually real. And you've also spoken openly against a lot of what we see inside of ayahuasca culture, sort of representing religious cults and problems within those cultures as well. But where do you draw the line between what is just what's coming up inside of a person's head that might be dysfunctional, might be an expression of what's not actually happening, and where it is something that's an extension of some larger influence beyond the self, such as perhaps spirits? I know that you use this terminology, and in the midst of this question, the underlying curiosity is, how do you, as somebody who, actively supports and embraces large doses of psychedelics, and even helps facilitate that in the countries where it is legal, of course, how do you check yourself for not being someone who might be embracing a delusional or schizophrenic type relationship to reality. Yeah.
Well, there's a few questions there.
Yeah, I couldn't condense it down. Sorry about that. You have 5 minutes.
You know, I think in terms of reality, in terms of, I think that whatever you think about reality, and there's many people who have many crazy ideas of reality. I mean, I consider Christianity has many crazy ideas of reality. My namesake, Julian Palmer, was burnt at the stake for not believing in the virgin birth, for example. That was in the 18th century in England. I mean, for me, that's just crazy. But I think the important thing is if you are functional and that you are actually living in such a way that you are helping other people, and that is something that people tell you. I mean, I get emails most days from people thanking me for my work. I've had 2 emails scroll up in the time we've had this conversation of people thanking me for my work. If I was just crazy and psychotic, I think it would be less likely that I would be able to help people. I would be so self-involved and in my own delusions or in my own ego or whatever, I wouldn't be able to help people. And so I would say I have been, and sometimes I am a little bit psychotic because I'm dealing with very high doses of extremely powerful compounds. Sometimes they do make you a little bit crazy, but you come back to sanity. You find your coordinates again. And I think you find your coordinates and you find what's most meaningful to you. And you have a good understanding of what has value and what has meaning and what is just meaningless or dysfunctional, what works, what doesn't work. I think that's a natural function of intelligence. Related to what is psychotic, I think you were mentioning this, I guess, this line, what is psychotic, what is sane, in terms of people who are mentally ill. I'm not saying that people who are mentally ill are not mentally ill. I'm saying that that actually a lot of the phenomena they may be experiencing is not invalid, and they may have and often do have a brain chemistry state or a state of consciousness that is severely out of balance. But also, I have a more radical view that is shared by people like the renegade Scottish psychiatrist R.D. Laing. Society itself is insane. Society itself is out of balance, out of touch, is really aligned with values that are really a bit stupid. Our materialistic, consumeristic consciousness, which puts consumer goods over human values like relationships and the value of the human being, and profit and war over human life is completely insane. So I think that is my my simple response to that question. Though there's a lot in what you said, and you could go into it for a long time, I think.
Great. Thanks, Julian. And I appreciate you responding to a complex, poorly formed question. James, you have 5 minutes to respond to Julian's answer to that question, starting now.
Okay, well, here we have Julian Palmer, who has essentially stolen or appropriated a sacred visionary ritual from a native peoples in South America and is now using it to enrich himself and his status among this peer group as an expert. at the same time that he criticizes and diminishes the people whose livelihood depends on this sacrament as being dark shaman who are not practicing it with the same sort of good-heartedness or good nature that he is. So there is a lot to unpack in what Julian Plamer is doing here, trying to sell this mythic idea of multiple realities, saying that he loves science and embraces science, and yet doesn't pay attention to it all because it's pathetic and worthless. I mean, come on. I don't really need to rebut this here. He has no way to tell what is a valuable idea in a psychedelic trip versus what is an imaginary idea versus what is a spiritual idea versus what is a psychotic idea, because he does not have accurate terms for what he sees and experiences. There are just things that he likes and he doesn't like. And if he says, oh, psychosis, crazy, I don't like that word, James Kent is trying to diminish all of psychedelic experience by using those words. And I'm doing no such thing. What I'm saying is that there are varying levels of psychedelic experience that can lead to the psychotic. You can have very, very rewarding low-dose experiences. You can have very, very rewarding medium-dose experiences. And you can have very, very rewarding high-dose experiences. But eventually, if you do it for long enough, you will start to lose that boundary between what is real and what is not. And when someone like James Jesso poses you a question that says, where do you draw that line? You have no clear answer. You say, I hate Christianity, but you believe in all sorts of magical thinking yourself. It's hard to take anything he says seriously, so I just really don't know how to rebut what he says.
Okay, so you both now have 5 minutes for your concluding statements. James, we will let you go first.
So in the framework of the discussion, it may be easy or simple to project onto me things like, I don't like psychedelics, or I'm critical of psychedelics, or I think everything that people say about psychedelics is crazy BS. That's not the case. I enjoy psychedelics. I spent a lot of time exploring psychedelics. Most of my 20s and 30s were spent exploring psychedelics with a pretty serious passion. And I have nothing but fond memories about all of those experiences. However, I spent a lot of time looking for answers in that space. And I was led down spiritual paths. I was led down New Age paths. I was led down mystical paths, healing paths, all of these different paths that lead nowhere. They just lead in circles. And you may think that you're evolving as a person, or you're learning something about yourself, or that you're finding meaning or a new way to navigate in the world through the experiences that you're having. And all of that is just sort of papering over what is really an escape from reality. That's what you're doing when you're taking psychedelics, is you're escaping from reality. You're taking a vacation from reality and going off into this wonderland where amazing new possibilities can happen. Now, those amazing new possibilities can be wonderful. They may lead to new insights that give you a new positive direction in your life, but they may derail you and put you on a strange, weird path in your life that leads you down all sorts of rabbit holes of magical thinking and crazy cults and spiritual delusions and whatnot, which, as I say, lead you nowhere. You can spend 15 years going down the path of studying plant spirits, but at the end of it, you're not going to have any better idea about how these things work. The only way that you're going to figure out how psychedelics work is to do the hard research. You can't just say, oh, the science is too hard. The science is pathetic. The science doesn't have any answers. Physicalism is incomplete. If you're doing that, that means you're lazy and you don't want to study the science. You would rather stay in the world of magical thinking and walk in circles thinking that you're making progress. The only way to answer this question, how do they work? What do they do? How do they affect the brain? How do you, promote positive outcomes? How do you deal with negative outcomes? You can't go into spiritualism and think that that's going to give you the correct answer, because I know people who've been into spiritualism since the time that I got into psychedelics, and where they are in their life is not in a great place. Some of them have got insane. Some of them have committed suicide. Some of them have joined cults. Some of them, I can't get them out of the cults that they're in, because some of them are living in the woods by themselves like the Unabomber because they can't interact in normal society anymore. And this isn't just, me saying I don't like psychedelics. This is just me giving you a warning that if you go down this path, there's nothing waiting for you. Tell me all of the spiritual leaders in the world who got there because they took a whole lot of psychedelics. Now tell me all the crazy people in the world who got there because they took a whole lot of psychedelics. On the one hand, you have 0 or 1 or 2. On the other hand, you have thousands. Now, the people who stick to a scientific path of discovery have a way of checking themselves between, am I being delusional or is this a realistic impulse? And that is physicalism. That is materialism. And you can denounce materialism all you want. But here's what I'm going to do. I am going to show you I'm not a hypocrite, I'm going to denounce spiritualism by taking all the spiritual things in my life and balling them up and throwing them away. God, spirits, superstitions, whatever, luck. I'll just throw it all away. There it goes. And I'm going to live without it for the rest of my life. Now, to show me you're not a hypocrite, I want you to ball up all the material stuff in your life, your goods, your possessions, your home, your friends, your family. Throw those all away and see how your life changes after that.
I think that James Kent is a very interesting voice in the world today, because there are very few people in the world today who have the viewpoint that he has, who have explored psychedelics at all. I know that you interviewed Daniel Waterman, who also believes that plant spirits are not real, the visions are not real, and I'm aware of just a handful of others, because I think that when you really go into this, you see that not that it's just real, but holy Jesus Christ Almighty, it is incredibly vivid and startlingly, amazingly beautiful and terrifying at the same time. And I think that taking psychedelics is not without its issues. I think that it can be, there are many issues and that can befall anyone taking psychedelics. And I make that very clear in my work. I also appreciate James Kent's podcast about the dark side of psychedelics, because I think there's many issues about going into all this and exploring all of what is revealed. I don't think it's easy. I think it's hard. I think we must be prepared to explore it. But I think there is something to explore. There is something there. That's not a question for me. I'm already exploring it. Many other people are. And we are in the early days of this exploration. And I think that it's valid and necessary for us to plumb the depths, not of the human mind, not just of the human psyche, but of the greater ecology in which we exist, which I think is one of enormous depth and breadth. So I think that it's rather than being someone wrapped up in the duality of spiritualism, physicalism. I mean, there is no physicalism. There is nothing physical. There's nothing spiritual. It's all consciousness. It's all reality. It's all stuff. Whatever we're experiencing is reality for us at the time. So I think that any kind of theory or understanding which tries to determine reality in any way as being just material or just physical, I think preempts the dialogue and discussion and investigation. And I do believe it's important that there is a neutral investigation. And I'm heartened by research by people such as Andrew Gallimore and Ed A. Frexka and many others who are very open-minded and wanting to scientifically explore and understand. And also, I think it's important that we go into it ourselves deeply and come to our own conclusions. And many people have. Many people in this day and age, especially who are working in the scientific arena, may be scared or unwilling to share their viewpoints or understandings about this reality. They're scared of being accused of being woo-woo or being ridiculed or whatever it is. But I'm noticing there's a lot of people in this day and age who are sitting on the fence. But also there are many people in this field getting off the fence, and they have the security and soundness of mind to say, well, this is what I believe, this is what I've experienced, and this is what my peers believe. Like I said, just a handful of people who have these viewpoints, and I think maybe I wonder what they've taken, in what circumstance. Or what I notice is the ideology seems to be quite similar, and I believe that some people have an intellect that maintains quite a firm grip on them. They're not actually able to acknowledge reality, and I think in this case, those people are the ones who are insane. Those people are the ones who do not see reality for what it is, are insane.
Okay, gentlemen, I would like to thank both of you for you coming on the show today and sharing your perspectives on clearly opposing sides of this discussion. And I also want to thank you for both maintaining respectful dialogue with each other throughout the course of this debate. So thank you very much.
Thank you, James.
Thanks, James.
It's good to see you, Julian.
And cut. Well, that concludes our podcast for today. Thank you very much for tuning in, and thank you very much to my patrons on Patreon for helping make this podcast possible. It is through your recurring donations that I can reliably trust in the economic revenue stability of committing myself full-time to producing this show, as well as my other areas of work inside of psychedelic culture. Thank you very much. If you, the listener, feel that this show has value and you would like to encourage me to continue to produce it by putting a little bit of economic support in my sphere, I would deeply, deeply appreciate it. And you can do so by heading to patreon.com/James W. Gesso, or by checking out the PayPal link that is contained in the description to this episode. This episode is also sponsored by Transzen, a herbal supplement for mood and stress. Follow the link in the description and use the promo code ATTM for free shipping inside of the United States. That is it all for the intro. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I will see you all on the next episode of Adventures Through the Mind. Take care. Interestingly enough, I both agreed and disagreed with both of you simultaneously throughout it. And I was like, it is not my place. I'm like, oh, no, no, no. So that was really entertaining for me.